So this is Ron and Charles and Jessica. You all please meet each other. I brought you all together because I wanted to talk about the election, but I wanted to talk about it from a completely different point of view, which is not to actually talk about the politics of it, but to talk about what it is, what it's doing to us, how it works. I would like anyone to listen to this, knowing that voting is very important and whatever your vote is the best choice for you and your family. That being said, the election, the process of electing a president or anything has become something rather intense, unwieldy, toxic, dangerous, dark. I don't even know what words to find. Charles, your background is in politics, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to actually join this. You have many, many years of experience in DC.
I don't think elections are inherently designed to cause as much conflict as what we're seeing. I think the democratic process is a good one. It's a beautiful one. I think, unfortunately, the two-party system in America has caused a lot of the issues that you're seeing. If I'm for something, I have to be against it. And if I'm against something, I have to be for it. And that often has created so many issues because it's not just about things that we don't care about. There are things that are so close to us, things that have to do with our religion, within our faith, things that, are relate to our purpose in life. So there's so many deep-seated feelings and emotions that happen and kind of revolve in our minds when we think about election. And the political parties, in many cases, take sides on these issues that relate to our emotions and our feelings and our faith. And that's what kind of rips everybody apart, is because, whether it's a religious or faith-related cause or education cause, one party's on one side, and if you're in the other party, you have to be against it, which to me is completely absurd.
In your experience working in DC when you were there, how much, because it seems to me that effective leadership requires that there be engagement with both sides, there be an understanding between both sides. How were you when you were in the trenches in DC? How was your community, in terms of what you wrote, what you would say, how was that communication crafted? Was it crafted to be connecting? Was it crafted to be combative? When you're writing press releases, what is the key in the election cycle? What is the key to a great press release?
Well, again, this goes back to the two-party system where if you're, especially in the House side, and you're in a conservative district or in a liberal district, you cater to that majority that's in your district, because if you cater to a party or a population where it's 60-70% of the vote, you cater to it, right? Because that's ultimately your goal, is not to just serve. Your goal is to get reelected. I mean, be honest about it. So you find yourself in situations where you're writing to, in some cases, evoke emotion in those people. There are times when leaders in the House or the Senate will bring legislation to the floor just to excite that faction of the party or of your population, to get them riled up.
So the actual legislation doesn't matter. It's entirely an act to get people.
Sometimes. Every once in a while, somebody will throw a flag burning amendment to the floor just to rile one side up versus another, or it could be on abortion. It could be on any particular issue because all right, we haven't spoken to these folks in a while. Let's throw something out there so that way we can remind them that we're on their side. And look, that isn't what they're everything. There are times when they do pass meaningful legislation, important legislation. But at the same time, because of the two-party system, you'll have certain senators say, oh, it's a great bill, but I can't vote for that because Harry Reid's name is on it, or because Chuck Schumer's name is on it, or McConnell's name is on it, which is absurd, because if it's good for you and me, it's good for all of us.
And you feel like sometimes, I guess my thing is, in an election year, it feels like there's a lot more of that than the effective leadership going on, that it seems that the tail is wagging the dog when it comes to the amount of time and effort put into re-election as opposed to governance.
Yeah, I think over time what we've done is perfect the art of partisanship. And I'm a communicator, and I served as a press secretary on Capitol Hill for a number of years. And the number one way you begin to put yourself into position is to define your opponent, right? So I can define myself by saying I'm great, I'm good, I'm really great at this. But if I'm running against you, I have to say he's terrible and he's horrible, or this is where he is, to show you where I am. You know about things and their positions when you compare things to one another. So I can say, if I said I'm the greatest football player of all time, you'd be like, okay, well, all right. Well, if I said I'm kind of like Joe Montana or Michael Vick, then that would put an idea into your head of what exactly I am and get you closer to understanding the type of player I am, right? So, you know, comparison, unfortunately, is a tactic, one of 100 different tactics that we've just perfected over the years to the point where it's gotten so nasty.
Ron, I am a big fan of because of your innovative work and research in leadership and communication. And I know you have been watching this sort of the wheels come off over the past few years, and then the engine came off, and then the side of the car came off, and then the doors came off. What are you seeing from your point of view as you engage with companies and people as the most disturbing trends in communication?
Well, you know, so if you liken what is an election? It's a series of decision-making systems, right? So we're making choices. And I think part of the challenge is politics today, like consumerism, depends on mindlessness, right? The consumerism brands build their, on sound bites, right? On little bits of information that cause to influence behavior. The problem is you cannot make your decision about what laundry detergent you use the same way you make a decision about who's going to govern your nation against policy issues that really mean a lot to you. But we do. And so I think the first issue is that we have not trained our electorate in how to make decisions, different than how they consume their goods in TV commercials or their ads. When you compound that with the fact that I think it's been like with the last 30 or 40 years, all the research shows that most people are voting against, right? We're not voting for a candidate we want. Since the Reagan election, most people are voting against the candidate they don't want, far more than they're voting for the candidate they do want. So it's been nothing but a degradation of a lesser of two evil elections. If that was what 2016 was, I have no words for this one. So to Charles's point, now if I'm defining what it is I'm against, but I think if you really looked at the American electorate on a continuum of liberal versus conservative, you'd find a far more nuanced set of people than you would on these extreme messages, right? You would find conservatives who care about the environment. You would find liberals who care about fiscal conservation and don't want big government and big taxes. So those of us who are that are far more centrist, are politically homeless. And so who represents us? And so you have, then you add social media. We don't have to go there much, but I've learned a lot about my feelings about that from you, about the incredible irrationality. And if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, we should all watch it. We'll have a lot of wine when you do. We're really being fed information, and we're consuming it the same way we consume our TV commercials, and we're making mindless choices. And so then it gets personal, right? So then it's when you have a family like mine of Italian New Yorkers, we got one everybody in the family. I watch people post things on social media, and I'm like, I don't even know this person. I don't even know the person who would write that. I don't even know how you would come to a place where you could write that. And so what do? It's this mindless irrationality, and nothing but mindless irrational. It's almost like it's almost like becoming a law of gravity. Get upset, rant on social media. Like there's just no dot connecting. There's no thoughts. It's just this trigger happy reflexive. I don't like something that Fox News said. I don't like something CNN said. Go and rant. Don't be informed. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't matter if you have the facts straight. Doesn't matter if you did any homework. Just rant. And then someone's going to out-rant you, right? And that's what this has devolved to. And I don't recognize my country anymore. I don't recognize my fellow Americans anymore. I just wonder, You know, all I could think of during the debates was, oh my gosh, the property values in Canada just quadrupled.
The ranting and the being against is really so key. And I wanted to bring Jessica into this because we were talking about, I remember in 2016, watching this election and thinking, just let it be over, because when it's over, at least we'll have a winner and then it can calm. And then it didn't. It ratcheted up year after year. So we have these homes and environments and social media full of anger and rage. Jessica is a pediatrician. And so the reason I wanted to bring her on is, what is the impact? Everyone always says we make decisions for our children. We're making these decisions for our children. What is the impact of this election process, of this process of rage and anger in the patients that you are seeing? You are now for 4 years been treating patients whose parents have been to various degrees angry, upset, rageful, protesting, whatever. What are you seeing as the long-term effects in your patient population?
It's a really interesting question because I've always seen kids have a little bit of anxiety, but I have to say I've never seen anything like it, especially in the last few months since, I'd say since COVID has occurred. I've never seen anxiety at such an all-time high. And I do think there's definitely absolutely a correlation with anxious parents, parents that are really caught up in the election with COVID. You can sense it. They talk about it, how they're all involved, all consumed thinking about it, and you can see it manifest in the kids. No doubt about it. So, I mean, I always say little kids have big ears. So parents, even though they don't think their kids may be listening, or maybe they do, maybe they want to inform their kids. But unfortunately, I think it's a lot for kids to handle. I think it's a lot for kids to take on, every shooting to hear about, what's happening with COVID and Trump and the election and the stress they feel. I think it's a lot for kids, especially now. It's not like we live in small towns and we only hear the gossip in the news of our small towns. We're hearing everything, between news on 24/7 and social media. We hear about every tragedy, every, bit of gossip, and kids hear it and they take it in. And I think it's hard on them. I have people that I refer to for anxiety. I have a couple people on my list, and I've always had no problem getting these kids in to see these counselors, and they're filled. And then now they're hiring anxiety specialists, and they're filled, and it's crazy. I mean, it's not fair to the kids, to be honest.
And I guess that's, to me, the thing I want people to feel is that no one is saying that the election is not important. And no one is saying that you shouldn't take your vote very seriously.
Right.
It's the full embodiment of a rageful election cycle that now lasts 4 years. So there is no down in the cycle. It's only a 4-year cycle that begins another 4-year cycle. There is no downtime. And I think from 2016 to 2020, I just watched in awe as the rage ratcheted up again and again and again. And I thought, this is not sustainable. Like, where is this going to go? And then I kept going into people's houses and seeing kids behaving very oddly. And so I was like, there's something about absorbing all of this, taking in all of this media, binging, gorging on this rageful media that's trickling down. And so you are seeing that there is a level of their childhood is actually being removed.
And I'm seeing it at all ages. What's even, I find really sad is as young as 4 or 5 years old, I'm seeing kids suffer from anxiety where parents are asking about putting them on medications for, like, at that level. I've had that request a few times. And then I've seen a number of teenagers in the past few months that have tried to hurt themselves. And that really upsets me because I don't know where to place it, or I'm not saying it's all the parents by any means, but I do think that, everybody's internalizing the anger and the, how divided the country is, what they're hearing. I think it's hard. I think it's really taking a toll on the children. And I think it's hard, socially, they're not with their friends, they're not at school, they're around their parents a lot who are probably out of jobs. Maybe the parents are fighting, who knows the circumstances, but anxiety, I've never seen it so high.
Let's talk now about the us, them, for, against, two side, only two options, black and white. Charles, when you were working in DC in general, like what happened to the middle? What happened to, how do we vocalize and create a voice for the middle when we know the ends are louder, more viral, more soundbitey, get shared more? If the senator gets a dig in, that'll get shared more. As you were in the political process, how did you see the process bending to the new sort of need for sound bites, the new sort of need for viral content to spread?
I think there are two issues. One is structural in terms of gerrymandering. On the House side, these districts have become so polarized that it actually isn't the fault of the members. It is actually the electorate, their constituents that are polarized and want these things that some of your more extreme members want. And part of that is eliminated. You don't even hear about a liberal conservative or a conservative Democrat, conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican anymore. We had a couple of those. We had blue dog Democrats in the House. We had liberal conservatives in the House as well, and that doesn't exist because of gerrymandering. The other
gerrymandering to you in layman's terms, because I know what, but how to talk about what gerrymandering is.
So they're the way that districts are drawn by the state houses to elect members of Congress. So every year, every 10 years, based on the census, based on whoever's in power in a particular state, they draw the lines for Congress, and they try to. In most cases, you'll try to fit a certain type of community into a district and another type of community in a district. But too often, those districts are drawn by their political leanings. Say you can get more conservatives into one district. Maybe there's too many conservatives in this district, so you're going to move some over into the liberal district to try and elect another conservative in another district. But a lot of times, they're drawn in a way where you really, really get strong political leanings so people can stay in power forever. And that contributes to a problem. But the other biggest problem, and I think we talked about this before, is information. Our information is so siloed. If I want to hear conservative news, I go to Fox. If I want to hear liberal news, I go to MSNBC, right? And we're not listening to the same information. A little bit of what you were talking about with the social network,
Dilemma.
The social dilemma. The other issue is, and we had this conversation too. I used to work for the Speaker of the House in the Capitol, and at one point in time, constituents came in and asked him, like, why is it so polarized? We just want to get this thing done. And the speaker kind of put his head down for a little bit, looked up and said, a lot of it's because we don't talk to each other anymore. Back in the day, we used to hop in a car and drive back to our districts together, whether it was Kentucky or Indiana or Illinois. Now we just hit a button and I'm on a plane and I don't have to see anybody. And, when it really comes down to issues, a lot of them are regional, right? If you're in Indiana or in Illinois, your issue has to do with, like, it may be farming, it may be corn or something. If you're in California, your issue may be water, right? A lot of these issues are regional, and if you're a Democrat, Republican, regardless of who you are, you need to talk to your neighboring Congress member or senator and figure things out and push for them in Congress. And that, unfortunately, doesn't happen because we're not only siloed by the information that they're getting, right, but we're also siloed by technology.
Ron, in terms of effective leadership, we have major issues in this country. No, not even COVID, poverty, crime, major issues of the cost of education, the working poor. Are we getting the best solutions? Are we getting the best work if you have two sides that won't engage each other? How is that affecting the actual governing when you have two extremes that make their entire identity based on the fact that they are polar opposite and non-connecting and non-communicating?
Well, you have to know that your solutions are going to be all either non-existent or suboptimal, right? I think I mean, to Charles's point, I think it was the Clinton administration that changed the congressional calendar, where they used to require a certain amount of days in DC, they had apartments there, and they were forced to collaborate. When they took that calendar away, you went from 3.5 weeks a month in DC to like 4 days a month in DC. So they literally don't spend it, they're not bumping into each other in the hallway in the Capitol. They're not collaborating. And so there's no forcing function anymore. So that, to Charter's point, without that, now binaryism becomes the default mode. Well, there's no complex problem has binary solutions, right? So you already know that the quality of your solution is going to be compromised. But even worse than that, if you have to spend 70% of your time campaigning to get reelected and 30% of your time governing, now you really don't have sufficient time to actually devote to learning about the problems and doing good basic problem solving work, right? Problem solving is a very sophisticated skill. When it's a complex problem with complex issues, that means it needs a complex problem solving process. That means the level of conflict management, decision making, data analytics, group problem solving technique, the kind of sophisticated skills leaders need to bring to the table to do that work around their differences. We're not voting those people in. And frankly, people with those skills aren't running for office. So we're sending people to the jobs who are woefully inadequately qualified to do them. So they do the job they can do, which is campaign.
Yeah. So I want to say about the folks that are in Congress, they're not governors, right? They're not governing, they're legislating. And so I think, and this is me at work. This is the folks like me that were on Capitol Hill that espouse this idea that if you're not on the Hill, you're not working, when that's completely false. And you'll notice whatever party is in control or out of control, they're going to complain that, you know, this guy's not in DC and so he's not doing work. When actually, if you're meeting with farmers, if you're meeting with religious leaders, if you're meeting with civil rights groups back in your district, you're working,
Sure.
right? And there's no such thing as, oh, well, you know, they're spending, your job is both in Washington and it's wherever you live. And so I think, I don't think that that's a part of the problem. I do think there's more to do with the conversation and the actual relationships that exist. I remember hearing this story about, there's a house on Capitol Hill and all the women in the Senate, there's a couple women in the Senate, like maybe 4 or 5 women, they live together. And these women get so much done, and it's Democrats and Republicans. And people always used to ask them, well, what's your secret? You guys are teaming up on all these bills and stuff. And it's because they live together.
Yeah.
And that just
And Charles, let me be clear, Charles. I was not suggesting that it's a work ethic issue at all.
Yeah.
It's a skill issue, right? It's the fundamental skills needed. I think that they're doing,
Well,
there's plenty of activities.
That's
There's plenty
another
of
issue.
activities to
The
work.
issue behind that is that we've shunned experience. So when you come to the table and you have years and years of experience, you're going to say, well, this guy is he's a Washington guy. He doesn't represent me, and he served too long. Or, you know, how does he know how I feel, right? Or this guy's a career politician. But you know what? Spending 20 years on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will give you 20 years of experience at creating laws that are effective. And unfortunately, it's the constituents listening to some campaign spew ridiculous information about the fact that this guy is in this committee and he hasn't done anything. And the reason why they're saying he hasn't done anything is, how do you know what the ins and outs of the subcommittee work that he did and the committee work he did before a bill got to the floor and potentially failed? We don't. So
Right.
Joe Biden hasn't done anything. Or you know, before him, George W. Bush didn't do anything in Texas, right? But that experience at doing work that's behind the scenes, that doesn't bubble up and become a major bill, it's worthless. And the years and years that you spent gathering experience is worthless.
And that's unfortunate because those are the people that actually have the skills to collaborate. I have a good friend of mine, Chris Campbell, who worked on the Hill for years. He was one of the only people ever elected by both houses of the Senate unanimously to lead the Senate Finance Committee. He led it for 4 terms, both houses of presidents. And he talked about bills he wrote, you know, and the collaboration back then between, you know, Kennedy and Hatch. And back then there was civil engagement. They could collaborate. You knew how to compromise. And how the people there, many of them in that era of politics, wanted to do the right thing. They were there for the right reasons. And, you know, I mean, it's not that the people are ill-motivated today, but the design of the job itself doesn't inherently direct you to do the kind of problem-solving work, which is legislating is problem-solving. It doesn't engage you to do that kind of work that you need to do.
Ron, I just have a question. Oh, given that, so it sounds like social media and being, you know, not meeting in person is contributing in a large way to not collaborating. How do you think we should get back to that? It sounds like, because I'm a believer in communicating in person. I think that's so much more effective than, you know, like you're saying, like those zingers on Facebook and social media. How do we get our Congress to talk and to get together?
I mean, it's a great question. You know, when I get to do this in the private sector, you design the work to do that, right? So if you design the work to force the function, put the congressional calendar back to where it was, where they have to be there, and you know what they need at this point, they need marriage counselors. We need outside help. We need outside facilitators to come in and help them understand this is what good problem solving looks like. This is what the work is.
Right.
And it's not that they're not. These are smart people, right? They're educated people.
And it's not that they don't get along.
But you have to change the nature of the work from campaigning to actually problem solving.
That's something I wanted. The 70% when you said, and I think it's more than that, the amount of time spent on fundraising. So I had a very, very talented friend who works in New York City doing amazing work with very, very low-income people for many, many years. And she got noticed by a political party. And they had these meetings. And I thought, this is wonderful. Someone is noticing someone who has a real talent for leadership and making her community better. The first thing that they really talked about was how much money could she raise. And they made it very clear that her future in politics, it was entirely dependent on how much money she could raise. And what they asked her first to do was to possibly, for the lowest level, could she raise $80,000 for a campaign? And she was like, who do I know? And I was like, wait a second. What could you do with $80,000 in your community? Like, what is going on here? Like, you were doing good work. Why did this whole conversation get hijacked to you going through your Rolodex, looking who's, and that's exactly how it works, is that the sound bites, the angry sound bites make more money. I had a DC lobbyist, actually, Charles knows this DC lobbyist very well. And I asked her on the record, does an angry population make you more money? A, yes. B, no. C, it's more complicated than that. And she said A. She said it's absolutely A. And we know media makes much more money. CNN and Fox are doing beautifully the past 4 years. Yeah. So if everyone is benefiting from the money made off of rage, what is the incentive to the middle to be quieter, simpler, compromising? How do we possibly get a word in when the ends are screaming?
Yeah, I had a professor in grad school at Johns Hopkins say that facts and numbers lead people to think, and emotion leads people to action. So you want people to actually go push a button and vote for you, you have to stir up that emotion. But I want to get back to your point about the money. The money is to be seen. The money is to pay TV folks or radio to get to get more people to see who you are. It costs money to do that. For the same reason that, you know, for Jessica, for her to promote her business, or for Ron, for you to promote your business, you know, it takes a certain dollar amount to try and market yourself in a particular area. So if you're in New York, or in a major media market, you got to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, right? You're in a smaller town, you don't have to raise that much. And that's why they say, like, okay, you're here, if you can self-fundraise, then I don't have to pay to put you on TV. That's less money that I have to deal with, and I could spend more money somewhere else in an area that we need to spend money on. And you're right, fundraising is a problem, but it's not just a function of politics. It's a function of media and advertisements.
How then do we, I mean, I was saying to someone the other day, what about capping it? Like make it $1 billion, but make it a cap that when it's endless, it really is, it just revs faster and faster and
Well,
faster
think
in
about
every
that.
election.
You would have to tell a station, look, you can only accept so much for airtime on your station, and they're competing with Burger King and McDonald's for that ad space, right? Maybe there's a way they can legislate that, but that's what you're competing. That's what you're up against. It's everyone competing for that airtime on that radio station, on that Spotify station, on that TV station. That's why it costs so much.
I guess to me, the thing is though, in terms of the effectiveness of fundraising, the effectiveness of someone's message, it travels much farther if it's emotional, provocative. Jessica, for you in sort of medical and knowing that, you know, COVID, you're dealing with kids, so you're not on sort of front line of COVID. Are you seeing as we're going through this, that people's information that they're operating with is different, that as people are coming into your office, they're coming with completely different sets of facts of what's happening?
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of the times the way they present themselves, I can kind of deduce the way they're going to vote without having to say so many words, which is unfortunate because it shouldn't be such a political issue. For example, I had a mom come in, actually I've had the situation a couple of times where, you know, they don't want to wear masks and they tell me they don't believe it. And do I believe it? And they're not going to wear a mask. And this isn't a small, I mean, I understand there's certain situations where I understand if you don't want to wear a mask, you're outside, you're in the outdoors, you're far from other people, but in a small medical office and you know, it's, I don't know, it's a little interesting. And then on the flip side, I'll have families that are so nervous, they don't want to touch anything. They're wearing three layers of masks. They're wearing the face shield. They don't want to sit in the chair. They don't want to touch anything. They want me to come outside. They want me to examine the kid in the car. They're so nervous. You know, I'm seeing definite extremes. So I think either that's a reflection on personality, or it's a reflection, you know, like maybe people that tend to be nervous, it's exacerbating, COVID's exacerbating that. Or I just think people are probably getting their news from different sources and it's showing. If that makes sense.
If we can
Let me turn this up. Hold on one second.
Oh, go ahead. Well, having watched The Social Dilemma, and Ron, you and I have talked many times about this, where does the power for the middle come from? Like how can it, with the algorithms being what they are, with viral working the way it does, that angry, intense gets passed along. No one says, oh my God, you have to share this subtle and nuanced argument. How does the middle get a voice?
Not on social media. I think part of, we need to wake the middle up, which I actually think if you actually did the research, you'd find is the vast majority of the country. The vast majority of the country is not on the extremes the way the loudness would tell you. We have to decide to take that power back. We have to decide, you know what, we want a voice, we want to be heard, and we want people that sound and govern like us for our needs, for our nuanced beliefs. I think part of the disappointment for many people, my peers especially, have been around a while, because I love my nation the way I do, I don't want to be told I have to choose between compassionate immigration or a secure border. I don't want to choose between free enterprise or environmental stewardship. I don't want to choose between the Second Amendment or responsible gun controls. I want them both. And I could have them both. If I had people legislating to put together complex solutions to complex problems, I could have them both. But if you present that, you look weak, you look collaborative, you look wishy-washy. But I think if you actually ask the nation, what do you want? Would you live with this solution? You'd find far more people willing to come to the middle and give and take, to just not have the rancor and get things done than people on these ridiculous ends of a polarized tugs of war in false binaries, in unrealistic solutions that that won't work anyway. But you'd have to provide honest information about what a secure border really means and what compassionate immigration would take. You'd have to you have to get rid of the NRA so you could talk about what the Second Amendment really requires and is honoring, and what AK-47 governance would look like to make sure they don't get in the hands of the wrong people. We talk about these things as if they're not possible. They're more than possible. We could have health. We could have great healthcare. We could have a healthcare process that we can actually afford. We have to be willing to make some sacrifices, but we could have that. But if you come to the table and work that way and collaborate that way and to build those solutions, you have to have people who can do the work, who intellectually have the horsepower to understand the complexities of them, and then simple enough to better explain them to their constituents, and be willing to work with people who they've been told they have to represent as hating. That's
Sounds
a
amazing.
big shift. But we could do it. If we decided in the middle that's what we wanted, we could have that.
Now the issue becomes, I mean, myself as a lay person in the political realm, whenever there's a third party, people say, "Oh, you're wasting your vote. You can't consider the third party. You have to pick, one extreme or the other." And so I think that poses some difficulty. I mean, I don't know what you think about that. Maybe.
I totally get it, Jessica. I think if you had a credible independent, that it would be interesting to change. I mean, Ross Perot tried it, right? He certainly changed the conversation. He didn't have a shot. I think everybody thought Howard Schultz might be that guy. I would have loved to have seen. I actually was very intrigued by Michael Bloomberg.
Me too.
I actually think the problem was he was another one. He looked like another New York billionaire, so the shadow was too big over him. And he was. We learned he was a terrible debater. But I actually think he's a smart leader, and I actually think he's a good problem solver. And so I would have loved to have seen one of those out of the box candidates. We all want the Madam Secretary, run as an independent. And if Biden had been creative, right? And this would have been my fantasy. If he reached across the party line, I know this would never happen, but if he asked Nikki Haley to be his running mate.
Wow.
I said Condoleezza Rice. That was Condoleezza Rice.
One of those two, we'd be over. We'd be done. You'd have people fleeing, right? But that would take courage. That would take guts. That would show commitment to the middle. And he went the other way.
When did compromise become such a
bad word? It's a bad word. It's because people hear it as I'm giving up something. It's a dilution of my principles. I'm giving up my values. And to the evangelicals, it's heresy. To the extreme liberals, it's environmentally damaging, right? It's none of those things. But we have created a narrative that says, first of all, I actually think it's the wrong word, right? Collaboration, synergy, bringing pieces of solutions together is actually good. Giving up pieces of things you thought you wanted to get something greater isn't giving something up. It's creating something better. But you have to be that. That's a learned appetite, right? You have to be taught that. What our media teaches us is that you're weak. You're diluting the cause, and so we keep our mouth shut. We don't say anything because you get hammered.
Charles, a third party. What the two-party system that is so entrenched. What is there? Is there any hope of adjustment? Has there been attempts to adjust? What do you think about the realistic nature of a third party or more? I mean, many countries have many parties. It's not just two. What do you think, Charles, is realistic? What do you think is not realistic? And what is your opinion on that?
You'd have to have a major schism. Like it would be like.
Let's say, for example, today.
You could, within the Republican Party, perhaps have libertarians leave, and then you would see that. I really don't necessarily agree with the idea that people really, really want the middle. I think I've sat in these congressional offices, and the people that are calling in, the amount of people that are literally about one way or the other, it exists. Like people, if they're pro-abortion or pro-life or whatever you call it, that's what they are and that's how they feel about it. People are really polarized on that issue. People are really polarized on the environment. Whether or not you're working in the fossil fuel industry or you're an avid hiker that just loves the wilderness, people have extreme feelings about things because they're hard issues. And it's easy for, I think, us to say this now because our emotions may not be aligned and we may be more empathetic to people that feel a certain way. But there are a lot of people that feel very strongly about some really tough issues.
And my only point, Charles, would be, I actually think the people calling in with those voices are the loud minority. I actually think if you actually did the research and did a decent body of empirical studies of the nation and asked an informed set of, from a wide variety of socioeconomic and political backgrounds, what they really wanted, I think you'd find far more along a very political spectrum, right? But far more here than you would here. I think these ones are the loud ones, but I don't think they're the most.
It was this weekend. I ended up having a conversation in a swimming pool. We got to go away this weekend. My husband had 3 days off in a row, and so we went. And I was talking to this woman about politics, and I could tell by her face she was very uncomfortable. And I was like, no, we're going to go there. And we did. And we had a conversation. And it turns out that she's voting opposite than I am, and we had a long conversation about Black Lives Matter, about the movement right now. And she had really well-researched thoughts. But in a course of 20 minutes, we talked about reparations. And I said, I'm a fan of reparations. I just wouldn't call them that. And in 20 minutes in a swimming pool, she was like, I would be on board with that. I would be on board of reparations. My suggestion, just was like, give it in terms of school education credits and home credits. Those are the two things that they were never allowed to accumulate for various reasons. What about that? And she's like, well, they do that for Native Americans. I'd be fine with that. And they do that for first home buyers. That makes sense. And I was like, in 20 minutes, we have literally negotiated between us a possibility of something 10 minutes ago you were absolutely against. And all it took was a little bit of conversation. And again, it's much more complicated than that, but the fear in her eyes when I approached her that we were going to talk about politics was so real and so terrifying. And if I had a heart, I would not have done it, but I knew we were going to get to the better place. And we did. And having traveled for 5 years now and had thousands of these conversations, people are not nearly as far apart as they seem. Yes, they're intractables. Abortion is one of them. But I do believe that on a day-to-day basis, we are not even used to an idea of government that would be, oh, it's going to be something in the middle. Either you win it all every 4 years or you lose it all every 4 years. And everyone just keeps getting whiplash back and forth. And there's no consistency. To me, there is a middle. And even if they're statistically not huge, they're just quieter. And I feel like the squeaky wheels always get the most grease. And I think it's a problem in how the social media works, but also in terms of our politics. It feels like everything is about not compromising and not even honoring them and resisting them and not engaging them. And I'm like, well, how does anything get moved forward?
Sorry, I'm laughing because in my head, I'm seeing people like marching and protesting, saying, compromise, compromise. It's just so,
I know.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm laughing. I have to just say a quick story or interject. Riaz, you met another friend in the pool in Palm Springs?
I met Jessica in a pool in Palm Springs like 11 years ago. I realized I'm seeing some other people apparently. It's a good way to talk to people, but it's
with Add a Margarita, and it's really going to be productive.
Add a Margarita. But it's amazing to me how people are afraid to talk on all levels. And then when you do, they're not as far apart as they think they are. I had taken this did this podcast about people trying to come to consensus on the gun debate. And this immigrant, progressive, moms demand action mom ended up spending time with this firearms instructor from the NRA. And by actually spending time together, they realized there was like 2 or 3 things they disagreed on. Otherwise, they were so sure that they had absolutely nothing in common. And that's the messaging, is that we have nothing in common. It's the us as in the thems, when if you actually sit down, it's quite similar. Like none of us want our children to get in trouble when they go to school, whether they're Republican parents or Democratic parents.
Have you ever seen a couple that can't communicate?
Yes.
So I think I think your survey is probably a little bit biased, because I think, like we were talking about earlier, half the battle is being able to communicate. There are people that cannot talk to each other and listen and understand and bounce ideas. So once you get past that barrier of being able to communicate, and Riaz, you're probably a master communicator, that's honestly, you're 75% there.
I think there's two versions of that, Charles. I agree with you. There's the orientation to do it, and then there's the skill to do it.
Yeah.
And so even if you have people who are terrified of it because they either lack the skill or just too afraid of conflict, if you get past their fear,
Yeah.
now if they're unskilled or unqualified, they're going to be outgunned, right?
Yeah.
So you have to, people need training to do this. But you could do that. You could, you get elected to Congress, you got to go to a 6-week boot camp on how to communicate. I'll pay for that. But it ought to be, not just about presenting yourself on a camera, but how to sit and talk to somebody who doesn't think the way you do.
Yeah. I have no doubt that my wife and I will go the distance. And the reason when I knew that was going to be the thing was I had we had an outside friend kind of hanging out with us, and I got into an argument with my wife, and we finished, and the person said, "Wow, that was the most productive argument I've ever seen."
Wow.
And part of it's because she's a negotiator and a lawyer, and I'm a professional communicator. So we're able to get there and understand each other. And also, I think even before you're oriented, right, you have to respect the other person, right? You have to respect their feelings, their emotions, and say they're real.
Yep.
And we have people that are not even doing that.
Oh, most of them aren't. Most of them aren't. One of the things Chris Campbell told me from the Hill, he said, you always have to start with the assumption that the opposing view is legitimate. No matter how outlandish it is, you have to begin with the assumption that their views and their feelings are legitimate. And if you do that,
I would even add to that I like to give people, I always say I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they're well-meaning. So I think the problem now is so many people, they hear an opposing argument or an opposing point of view and they make assumptions about that person's character. And I think that's really not a productive way to go about it. Like you hear, oh, they want, if they have a feeling on abortion that you don't have, and then you make assumptions about their character. And I think it's so much softer, and if you come from a place of compassion where you think, I'm going to give that person the benefit of the doubt that they're well-meaning, that they're a caring person as well, and you actually hear them out. You might not agree with them in the end, but at least you're not, I think the conversations are much more productive, and at least you can hear where they're coming from a little better.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jessica. I think if we just had more empathy and curiosity, but we have this trigger-happy impulse to refute, reject, and convert.
Yeah.
That's so true.
There's no thoughts. It's just this impulse. Conflict is so healthy. Conflict is the raw material of innovation.
Yes.
If you want creativity, if you want great outcomes, there has to be sparks.
Yeah.
And you have to want those sparks.
Yeah.
And it can be personal. The differences are what gets to the better solutions. To your point before, we asked about how we collaborate. You got to get in there and mix it up.
Yep.
With respect. Sorry?
The pressure that creates the diamond.
Absolutely. It's a healthy thing. It's good. People hear the word conflict and they think bloodshed, they think lawyers, they think warfare. People have had bad experiences with it, right? Fighting and yelling, it's offensive. That's not what conflict has to be. Conflict can be very productive and meaningful.
I used to tell people all the time that, they say, what do you expect for election? What do you want for election? I'd say, well, I really want a Republican Congress and a Democratic president, or a Democratic Congress and a Republican president. Like, how? Why? I said, because that's the beauty of America. When you have two different opposing ideas come together, you're forced to negotiate, and you don't get something lopsided.
And the ideally, what you get are the best solutions. That's not what's happening today, unfortunately, but that should be how it should go.
Well, Congress is split. So.
And if one side completely demonizes the other side, it's not that they have any good ideas to bring to the table. This is the problem I'm having, is that I'm amazed when I talk to people. We did a podcast, the same thing about school shootings, and someone said, what about red flag laws? And half the table was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I hear red flag laws in campaign ads 400 times a day because of where I live. You live 30 miles away from me and you've never heard the term red flag laws? That the actual ideas bringing to the table cannot be brought to the table because half the side hasn't heard half of them. It was amazing to me, the gap in knowledge, that I would get off a plane in Texas and I'd look at the TVs and I'm like, oh, it's completely different news. And then I tell people, and they watch the social dilemma, and they see people saying, yes, you're getting two different sets of reality, and they still
At least
don't
two.
believe, at least two, and they still don't believe that their feelings about the other side might not be accurate, that their feelings about the other side might not be authentic. They will not let go of that rage and anger. They want that rage and anger.
Our tribalism is very satisfying. We like tribalism.
Yeah.
We like to feel like we belong. And the reality is our instant information access has taught us that all we know is all there is to know.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually believe it. What I know is actually right, and it's everything.
I think tribalism, it is bad, but in some ways it's inherent human nature. It's like when you put kids in the lunchroom and all the tall kids go one area, all the kids from one neighborhood go to another area. You know what I mean? It's a natural thing to be attracted or meet someone and sympathize with them because they're kind of like you.
Yeah.
The first thing you do, and probably in this conversation we have, is say, oh, well, Ron, you're clearly from New York or New Jersey. We've got that in common, right? So then I'm like, oh, so how can I relate to him? Or, oh, I understand him a bit more, right? So I think part of it is just inherent.
It is. We're hardwired. Our brains are wired to find. Our amygdalas are triggered until we get a belonging cue. Until we see, I'm in the tribe and I'm safe here. But what's interesting about tribalism, if you look back in human development evolution, tribes can cooperate. Tribes are perfectly fine to actually work and collaborate until there's a scarcity of resource, and then suddenly then we're going to fight. But the reality is tribalism is not, you're right, it inherently is not bad. We've hijacked it to mean I'm good, you're bad. And so our default, to your point, Riaz, our default mode is vilification.
I'd be interested to hear
Jessica, it's not respect, it's not curiosity, it's they're villains.
I'd be interested to hear how Jessica deals with that with kids, because tribalism's got to be at its peak with beings that haven't even had their own brains developed yet.
I don't know. You mean in terms of politics?
Well, no, in terms of how they relate.
How they relate.
And, how they.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely kids will gravitate towards other kids that are like-minded or have similar interests. If they're I'll ask kids, where are your best friends from? It's either the parents' friends' kids or someone that they met through a common sport or a common class. But yeah, I think tribalism is definitely, it's part of life. But I think what I see with the news is it's become this toxic addiction. Like I have friends, they have to watch their show at 3:00. They can't go anywhere else, or they have to hear, they watch the news until really late at night. And how much news can you watch? I mean, it's so, what I hear is like years ago, there was only an hour or two of news tops a day, the 1950s compared to now where it's 24/7. And I think it's an addiction, an unhealthy addiction. I don't know.
No, it's very unhealthy. It's a great point. It's a very unhealthy addiction. And if you're a station, you have to fill 24 hours of stuff. You're going to make stuff up.
Right.
You're going to proliferate stuff. Your point before about children, Charles, made me think of you all know the famous spaghetti marshmallow experiment, the social experiment. It's a fabulous experiment that reveals what tribalism really is. So social scientists, I think they were from Duke, took a bunch of groups, a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of CEOs, a bunch of MBA students, and a bunch of kindergartners. Put them in groups, gave them like 30 hard spaghetti strands, a bunch of big giant marshmallows, and a bunch of Scotch tape. And their only instruction was build the tallest freestanding dilemma you can. The only rule was the marshmallow has to be on top, right? You got 30 minutes. And of course the CEO started debating and the MBA students are sort of filling each other out and the lawyers are all arguing. Kindergartners got right in there, right? And 30 minutes, people would say, well, who won? People would have guessed the CEOs. Kindergartners won it by 14 inches.
Wow.
Because they got their shoulder to shoulder. Classic kindergartners. Here, tape. Yeah, they just got in there and they built it. The NBA spent 20 minutes brainstorming and sort of alpha male each other. The lawyers spent 20 minutes arguing and they had 10 minutes left to do it. The CEOs came in second. The kindergartners were like 22 and a half inches. The CEOs were like 19 inches. The NBA's lost at 12 inches because it fell over. So the point is that we are naturally wired to cooperate if we let go of those biases that tell us we shouldn't, right? Kids, I think, are much more open to giving belonging cues to each other on a much more menial basis than adults are.
Really good point.
And if we could just go back to doing that, what would that change in our politics? It's hard not to wonder.
I feel like, to me, the whole message is to vote, but to check out emotionally if you can, because to recognize it for what it is. Not only is the system politically designed in election season to separate, but the media is absolutely, and the technology is absolutely designed to siphon into two funnels of information, if not more. And so to know that this is an election process we're all going through, but to check out from the I mean, to me, I'm going to probably watch 1 hour or less of news for the next week, and then probably when the election comes, I'm going to hide. But I don't, every time I take a break from the news, I come back to it. It's just as crazy and destructive and toxic as was before. The world was ending last week, and then I gave up news for a week, and the world is still ending this week. So it's not like much has changed. But to me, I want people to also think we're doing it, we're voting in the system because it exists. But where did our actual dream go? What is the actual right way to do this? Not just the way that we're stuck with, but as we're doing this, what is the right way? I mean, the amount of people who are like, well, I'm not happy about other side, but I just don't want him in. And I'm like, okay, I did that sort of in 2020, then 2016, then like at a certain point, when does the system allow us to have more options, more nuance? Will the system ever change, Charles?
From these conversations, what I'm learning and what I'm the idea that I'm starting to get in my head is that our education system is fundamentally flawed. Our culture is a little bit fundamentally flawed. We should be unraveling that hardwired thought that we only need to associate with people that look like us, speak like us. You know, we need to figure out a way where we're all on the same wavelength and how to decipher good information versus bad information.
Yeah.
When we went to elementary school, we learned about primary, secondary, tertiary sources. But now that we've got all these different mediums coming at us, how do we still even know what's right or what's wrong? And I think if we can teach kids early that being different is a good thing, and you should reach out and try to relate to people because it'll make you a better person. That's what we need to teach them. But at the same time, we also need to teach them how to really enrich yourself, how to really pick information, when to consume it and how to consume it. I think we need to go back to the basics. I think that is, our math 101 or whatever it was when we were growing up. That's what that is. And that needs to be a part of our education system. I'm trying to, in my head, I would love to study other cultures and how they teach children to relate growing up. I remember watching a documentary on HBO. I think this guy was in Japan. I think it was Japan. And the kids, when it's time to eat, they move the desks and they make their own food together. Then they all clean up together. And it's actually a part of the classroom. That's a part of the learning how to work together and how to be together and how to be a community is a part of the learning process.
Right.
Whereas our kids, they go into class, they check in and they check out, right? There's no sense of community or how you should relate to the next person and how this person may be actually making your food. There's this constant fight in Congress where it's actually the coasts and the farmlands are constantly fighting because people on the coast don't think their food just comes from shelves. When the more you keep telling people farm-free chicken and all this other stuff, it actually affects the farmer and their livelihood. Every little thing, they're getting taxed. They're getting, they're feeling that pressure. And so we're not understanding that we live in this culture where everything's symbiotic and everything affects us in some way. And teaching empathy. So we need to rethink American education and understanding that culture is inextricably linked within our education.
I also think something that scares me is I see how many teenagers are on their phones all the time. So a statistic, this is pre-COVID, mind you, so it's probably higher now, but there's a statistic that showed that the average teenager looks at a screen for over 8 hours a day. So second to sleeping, the second most area where their time is spent is looking at a screen. So they're not, if you think about it, they're not outside, when I compare to my own childhood, they're not outside playing with their neighbors. They're not forging friendships, like real friendships. They're, more concerned about having more friends on Instagram and Snapchat views and likes on their Facebook profile. And it's sad to me because it's not the same. That's not how you learn, how to resolve conflict with a friend. You can instead unfriend them or unfollow them if there's an issue. It's not real life. And I think it makes me worried, frankly, for the future. And especially I'm a mother of 3 kids, and I worry about when am I going to give them a phone? Because I know when I give them a phone, I worry that's the end of us talking and communicating in a fruitful way. So I don't know, the future also scares me with children in terms of, I think the way they're going to make relationships and conflict resolution, I think it's going to be stifled because of screens and because of social media.
I think this Social Dilemma has taught us that. And I think the solutions they offer in that documentary around limiting screen time, absolutely not giving kids access to social media till they're in high school. And I think there's some at least maybe college, right? I think these are very important. The health and mental and physical health implications are clear. So I think one of the things that you made me think of, Charles, in your point was, if you haven't read Michael Sandel's new book, The Tyranny of Merit, it's brilliant. It really gives you a very brilliant look at the populist backlash of today's election and why it is people from globalization have been left behind, and what's really at stake in this election. It's not the economic left behind, it's the dignity of work, right? It's the people who feel like their work is no longer esteemed. Suddenly the pandemic has brought into frontal view the essential workers who we had no problem overlooking 8 months ago. Now suddenly they're essential. I hope they stay essential and that they stay objects of our gratitude. But if we don't learn to dignify one another's work and esteem each other's work, those polarities keep us apart, Charles. I think the way we offer our kids civic education is we stopped it, right? Civic education happens in liberal arts school. We've stopped giving our children a sense of what it means to be good of citizenship and their civic responsibilities. I also think social media has made us intellectually lazy, right?
Yes.
We're all going to get a ballot in the mail. It's going to have hundreds of names on it. Right. And I think you made an important point before, Charles. So much of what affects our lives legislatively is regional and state. It's not the federal government. We go through these names. And how many of us look at it says Joe Smith prefers the Democratic Party, Ann Jones prefers it, how many of us know anything about these people? We're filling in bubbles like it's a multiple choice, we're guessing. So when you say, Riaz, we should get out and vote, well, like blindly, or should we be informed? Like go online, put the person's name in the search engine and read what they believe. Read what their platform, read what their experience is. How many of us get those ballots? We've been voting by mail for 20 years in Washington, so for us, it's not a big deal. I know everybody else is a little bit wigged out about it, but it's fine. But these ballots are long, and there's gazillions of names on them.
I think,
and sometimes they send you a magazine you can read. I don't know who reads them. But voting should be an informed process, not like going to the casino. But we have to decide as voters, when I fill in that bubble, whether it's regional, state, or federal, I should know what I'm doing. I should know what that colored in bubble represents. And I think how many people don't.
And
it scares me how many people don't.
COVID to me was a huge wake-up call of what is the impact of local government and what is the impact of federal government. That we're sitting here, my husband runs a nursing home, and the amount of regulations that are coming from the federal government that are not even remotely close to what he's dealing with in his area. And I kept hoping that COVID would make people say, oh, my local government's hugely important, to a degree almost more important in some ways in its day-to-day impact on me, and no one knows. All the energy, all the money, all the air in the room gets sucked out by the presidential campaign. And it's an all or nothing. We'll either have an amazing country that's been protected, or it'll develop into Nazi Germany. So it's this all or nothing on the presidency that has everyone emotionally tight and wound up of what will happen, as if there weren't layers of government and lots of effect that happens from their local, but they don't know any of the names. They don't know any of their policies. And those people, specifically in COVID, have so much more impact. And it's always this top line of the presidential campaign that takes up all the time and the energy. And no one knows the actual local.
I gotta say, with the California is ridiculous with our ballots because you've got measure A, B, F, Z. And I tell people when I'm going down the ballot, I'm Googling, like, what does the chamber think about this? What does our downtown partnership feel about this? What does the, Urban League feel about this, right? And I do that, and I tell people I do that. They're like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. And each one of them usually has their kind of card to tell you what their positions are, but it's never really clear, right? And you have to do almost your own research paper as you're voting, which is absurd. So I love, Ron, your idea of it being a magazine, right? Where it's straight bio or straight, narrative on what exactly is it I'm voting for. And yes, you'll notice that on the local level, there's always a ton more bipartisanship because they're not legislating some grandiose ideological idea. They're legislating whether or not they're going to repave the street that's in front of your house.
Mm-hmm.
And it forces them to work together to do that.
And many of them aren't even full-time, like the state legislature in Washington State, these are part-time legislators. They get paid $40,000 a year. They have to have other jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure there's lots of states where that's the case. The implications of that, to your point, forcing collaboration, but all the more reason why then you should know who you're putting in that office versus just making it about the party.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you all for your time. It really was to look at this from a different way. What are the flaws in the system? What are the flaws? What is the gasoline thrown onto this from social media? What are the implications, health, for us and our children? Because they're absorbing this. We're antenna pulling in all this rage and they are picking up on it. So it just wanted to look at this election because I think it's going to get wackier. And I don't know who is going to concede. So I think it's going to be a wacky election season. I really want people to be able to look at it and say, okay, this is cray cray. I'm going to do what I can, but there's other ways to engage my world. And the world that I think is out there on my phone is different than the world that is really out there. And sitting, and talking to someone who voted entirely opposite than me in 20 minutes, we're like, why don't we ever get, come to this compromise? It's disappearing the art of communication and conversation. And I think people will feel less angry and rageful if they humanize and personify the other side. Because the other side, according to your screen, is nothing but worthless, selfish horribleness. And that's not actually who people are. And so vote, get excited, be intense, but just check out from the constant rage, because as much as you can eat, they will feed it to you. And it's all you can eat, special, all night, all day.
24/7 buffet.
So all
What
day.
are our take-home points? How do we do that? Turn off the TV, turn off take social media breaks, spend time with friends and family?
Without a doubt.
Keep open
Without a doubt.
ears?
I don't know a single person who I've said, just put down the phone for 3 days. Just put it down. Don't look at news for 3 days. If it's something horrible, you'll find out. But just don't listen to it. And they always, always feel better. And at some point, they're a little less angry and rageful. And then a conversation they have with a neighbor they didn't have because they're not this, they're actually looking up. And it's amazing to me. Take in your news for an hour, take it in for half an hour, and then that's it. That's the news. You got it.
I think we all need to take a page out of your book, Riaz. Go and break out of your echo chamber. Go and seek out people especially if they're in your family, who don't believe what you believe or don't vote the same way you vote, and just sit and could we have a conversation? Could we not, could I just, tell me what you think. Not to convert them, not to find agreement, but just to humanize each other. Go and seek out people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who don't do what you do for a living, who are different economically brackets. Go and find them and hang out with them.
Yeah.
I think that can help restore the fabric of our civic society in a way that the election process couldn't assail.
Right.
I agree.
I'm in the middle.
Thank you all
And
for
rally
your
them up.
time. I appreciate you all. And stay sane out there.
Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you guys. Good to have
Nice
new
to meet you
friends.
as well.
Take care.
Bye, guys.